Good evening, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Monika. I'm co-chair of the NextGen London Group, and this is a very special event since we have partnered with Jilly and Kuldeep on this event from the investment sector group, and we're going to talk to you tonight about careers in financial sector communications. If you've been coming to our events for a while, you will know that we've done a couple of these events before. We did one focusing on tech, on corporate, consumer, and health communications. And we're really happy that we can continue with this series and do something a little bit different today because for some people, financial sector communications might be a little bit intimidating, but maybe we'll prove today that it doesn't have to be like that at all. And maybe you're just going to learn today that maybe it entails something completely different than you thought. And yeah, we just hope that it's going to be really insightful. The way we're going to do it today, so we're going to kick off with some introductions. So each of our speakers are going to talk to us about their career so far. Then we've prepared a discussion which will be led by Kuldeep, and then at the end there will be room for questions. However, you can drop your questions into the chat or using the Q&A during the course of the event as well. And then at the end, we'll try to answer as many as possible. So without further ado, Jilly, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So, I'm Julie Locke. I am a director at Powers Court, and I'm also the chair of the investment sector for the PRCA. I started my career in PR age 17. So I was actually, I found it quite early on, and I was quite lucky in that regard. I know most people fall into it, but yeah, I was quite lucky that in my gap year before going to university, I found a local PR agency where I'm from in Sussex that agreed to miraculously hire me for my gap year. And I worked there, and actually I did a degree in PR at Bournemouth University, which had a sandwich year as well, so a year out in industry, which meant that upon graduating, I had 2 years of experience, which was brilliant. And I think the one piece of advice I would give is any opportunity you have to get some experience, just take it, no matter what it is. As I say, I started out in a local Eastbourne based PR agency and learned some brilliant stuff from some fantastic people, even just then when I was very young. So my sandwich year was where I really started getting interested in financial services. So I decided to take, or was lucky enough to get offered, the placement that M&G Investments do, or used to do, with Bournemouth's PR degree. And that was in 2007, 2008, so right in the heart of the global financial crash as well. So certainly issues rich in terms of a baptism of fire right into financial services when I started. And that really gave me my sort of interest in the sector. I was fascinated with how it touched absolutely everything. So upon graduating, it was a tough time, and I think it might be something that we find in the next few years with the way the economy is going as well. It was there weren't many people hiring, so really the fact that there was that experience behind me was a real asset in me managing to get a role upon graduating. And I was hired by Elspeth, who gave me my first PR agency job in financial services. So forever grateful to Elspeth for hiring me. And so I spent a year and a half at, it was then Consolidated PR, now part of Four, working on financial services brands, before spending 10 years in FTI Consulting's financial services team, where I really got a taste for investments even more, and have become, throughout those 10 years there, really an expert on all things investment. So asset management, wealth management, investment platforms, trading platforms, and investment banking are all the areas that I've worked on, from UK small businesses through to massive global companies. So yeah, I think that's probably enough about me. I'll hand over maybe to Elspeth.
we go. So first secret out of the bag that I've worked with Gilly, and the second secret is I've worked with Gilly not once but actually twice as well. So it's part of the reason I'm here today. I started my career in PR. I studied English and philosophy back in the days when my mum says, go and expand your mind, darling, because that's the kind of thing that parents said to you 20 years ago when you didn't have to pay for doing a degree and you could just go learn stuff. And I think I studied English and philosophy and always assumed I'd become a lawyer or something like that. I had a good mind for detail, liked working my way through things. And then I worked in the pub locally to earn some cash to go out, as you do. And someone there was starting a job in PR and I was like, what is this? And they started talking to me about what the role entailed. And I got to the point where I was like, wow, there's a job where you get paid to talk to people and deal with people and do writing and reading. And it really piqued my interest. And, you know, when you just feel that something really fits. So I toddled off then to Cardiff University, where I did a postgrad in journalism and PR, because I definitely was at the stage starting my career where I was like, this sounds amazing. I got a bit of work experience, but I was like, I need to know what I'm doing to be able to do it. So I spent a year qualifying and did a couple of work placements as part of that. And within those work placements, actually was offered a role in one of them in a London agency. And I started my career in 2000. So we're in the middle of the dot-com bubble. There were a million jobs for everybody. So it's a very different environment, but it was amazing. Place to start. And, you know, again, as sort of Julie said, being someone who had got a bit of experience in a local agency in Cardiff and had also then done the qualifications, it definitely stepped me up and gave me the ability to get hired and get in. I thought I was going to work in charity PR and save the world, and basically went into this local agency and started working out that actually what I really enjoyed was doing corporate PR instead, and really getting my head around technical subject matter and turning it into stories instead. So I did that for a while there, and within that did all sorts of corporate B2B work, but also some financial services work. Really enjoyed that. I worked with massive brands, Barclays, Royal Bank of Scotland, things like that. And then got to the point where I was like, my friends kept on asking me how to get a mortgage and what a credit card was and things. And I was like, well, surely financial services firms should be able to explain this a bit better. Why am I explaining it to people? So I went and worked for Consolidators, Julie said, which at that point was a really interesting agency where they brought advertising and PR together in a world which we call integrated today, but that was a long time ago, and worked in a financial services team there, which I joined as an account manager, and grew up to end up running the team for many years, and really taking brand-led thinking, audience-led thinking, and applying it to financial services brands across lots of different sectors. I then, we sold that business into four, and I sort of saw through the sale of the business, and then was sort of heading up the financial services team there before getting approached to go to FTI, where Gilly and I worked together for a second time. And my role there was to bring together, again, sort of more strategic planning, thinking, bring together digital PR and working with lots of different brands. And then after a couple of years, I got approached to do the role I'm doing now, which is running a firm called Vested, which we founded in the UK coming up for 3 years ago. And it's one of the fastest growing agencies around the world, specialising in financial services. So I've done lots of different things in different places, but that's probably enough about me. Emma.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Emma Phillips and I work as a director in the corporate communications team at BlackRock. Similar to Elspeth, I actually studied English literature at university, and I was attracted, I think, originally probably to advertising, and felt that that would be a really good way to deploy my creative skills, but also I was always very interested in simplifying complex matter. And I thought advertising would be a really good way to sort of, you know, let my creative spirit run free. Unfortunately, after applying to about 100 different jobs, it didn't materialize. So I actually ended up working shortly after graduating for a startup company, again in the dot-com boom, although I think I might have been a little bit more in the bust side of it, to be honest with you. We were incubating small and medium-sized startup tech companies. So at the start, it was absolutely amazing, and we had offices everywhere, and I was working for very small company, but there was no hierarchy whatsoever, so it was incredibly interesting. But obviously 2001, towards the end of 2001, the markets changed dramatically, and the company eventually sort of merged in with another company to become more of a traditional private equity firm. And I stayed there for about another year. I think I did everything that I could. I did some corporate finance work, working with compliance, and tried to sort of spread my wings. But really, the person that I'd worked alongside at the time, the comms director, had long left. And I was kind of left thinking, how do I end up doing that again somewhere else? And I ended up joining Merrill Lynch Investment Managers in the communications department, very much doing corporate PR essentially. We weren't really at that point doing any kind of product or placement PR or anything like that. It was all about protecting our brand, and I think it was a fantastic way to learn, be at the coalface of reputation management, although I didn't necessarily know that's what it was at the time. And then markets really improved, and I began working outside of the UK, hiring agencies across Europe, which was incredibly exciting. Got to travel a great deal. I think at one point I was managing about 15 different markets out of London, and kind of going out to visit them every three months or so. So it was absolutely fascinating. I got to learn how communications differed across different countries, and how important culture was, and how the media operated differently, and how how important nuance is. How, if you want to land a message, where you really have got to understand the market that you're operating in. I've worked across multiple business areas at BlackRock, which I've been very fortunate to given that it's a large company, and different audience segments as well. So everything from sort of wholesale, institutional, communicating to pension funds and the like, through to survey work with end consumers, which I think gives you an opportunity to communicate in different styles and mediums. And I'm now sort of gone full circle. I'm actually now heading up commercial communications for our UK business. So yeah, as the firm's got bigger, the UK's got even bigger. So yeah, it's very exciting times.
Thanks all for your introductions. You've all had very interesting routes into PR and to the roles that you're in now. Now let's get down to the nitty gritty. I know some of the audience will have concerns that they need to have some sort of qualification in maths and economics. I know we've already spoken about having comms degrees and English philosophy degrees when you were entering the role of your communications careers, but to enter into investment comms, is that something that is particularly useful on the CV? Emma, is that something you look for when hiring, and what other attributes would you look for and think are important for candidates?
Yeah, actually, I obviously don't have a financial background or indeed a maths degree or any of those things that I thought were table stakes for joining the investment and financial industry. So no, I think what the attributes that I would look for is somebody who's a very good writer, somebody who's got the aptitude, more the skills. You do need a certain skill set to be a good communications professional. Clearly, if you have an interest naturally in finance or in investments, or how the world works economically, for example, then of course those things will make your job much more enjoyable, to be honest, and I think it will help you get up the curve a lot quicker. But it's not imperative that you need to have a financial business or otherwise background to work in, I think, the financial or investment sector as a comms professional, at least. I'm sure that my my comrades here will attest to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have a PR degree, so I definitely have no maths modules when I was doing that, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd say the only area perhaps where that might differ, and where some people on this call might just be trying to work out, when we're talking about the investment sector, we're talking about asset managers, wealth managers, managing investments. There is also, of course, financial PR, which sits separately, and then within that, the separate subset of investor relations. And I'd say investor relations is probably one of the areas where it probably is a little bit different. Sorry about the background noise, someone's setting off fireworks. Yeah, I mean, Kiri can probably chip in as well, whether the PRCA has any training of their own when it comes to investor relations, because that is one of the areas where a lot of people in that area of the sector have a background in perhaps accountancy, but the investment sector and being a comms professional working within asset managers, wealth managers, or the investment sector more broadly, then I'd say absolutely not. And it's the sort of thing where you'll learn as you go. I certainly have. Elspeth, I'm sure you probably see this given your English degree.
I would, and I think that most people you'll end up talking to, if you're exploring a career in financial services comms, very few of them will say, what I always wanted to do from the age of 3 was work in financial services communications. Most people have fallen into it in some way, shape or form. So, we do occasionally, have someone who might be, say, an economics graduate who's realised that actually sort of the marketing communication side of it's more interesting. But broadly, it's far more about the skill of communicating, and then financial services being the subject matter that you want to talk to instead. So, yeah. I agree with others.
Yeah, and I guess in that sense, I wouldn't think it's probably massively different to something like certain areas of tech that can be, quite hard to get your head around as well from an initial perspective. But yeah, I think Emma's point on having an interest in the sort of macro political broader environment definitely helps. I think the thing that I certainly enjoy the most about my job is the fact that when I'm looking at the news in the morning, some different facets of everything will touch what we do. I remember back in sort of spring, I think it was the summer, when the Boohoo story came out about workplace practices in Leicester. From an asset management perspective, that plays right into the story around ESG, governance issues, and there it was a couple of days later, 2 huge asset managers came out and started talking about it and these practices. So, to a fashion industry and workplace practices in Leicester can be as relevant to the sector as, the geekier side of things. And I think that's what makes it so dynamic and so exciting as a sector to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. And just speaking from personal experience, I know that, right from my graduate role, I was, liaising with, senior stakeholders within the business. So it's all about having that confidence to hold your own in those positions. And again, it's about, rather than, your qualifications and whether, that your qualifications fit that sector, it's about the work that you do, you're reading around that subject matter, your interest, if your knowledge, the way that you build your knowledge up into that sector, the willingness to learn. And as my colleagues rightly said, is having the passion there. You're a communicator, and being able to use your communication skills to simplify these complicated messages is transferable across many sectors.
Yeah, I know an area that we were keen to pick up on as well that probably fits within this is, while maths isn't a prerequisite, there are certain things, and I think there are certain facets or assets that you need that aren't really different depending on whether it's financial services or any part of comms. But I guess being largely agency side, that point that you made there, Kuldeep, on confidence is, you do need to, I think PR is, unlike many other jobs where at a fairly junior level, you are exposed to quite senior people to advise them. And yes, you might have someone more senior with you, but you also might not. And I think, you know, agency side, you're getting paid to give that advice, so you need to be spot on and bring others in if you need to, quite frankly, as well, as you're going up the chain. But I guess, Emma, you probably got some really interesting insights on managing internally, you know, those people who are, and especially somewhere like BlackRock, you know, the number of senior people that you must have to navigate day in, day out and provide advice to, and confidently, you know, give that advice and not put off by the fact that they're so senior.
Yeah, and actually I was thinking about this before the call. I actually think that sometimes not having a kind of a business, financial, maths background is actually an advantage, because I think you can genuinely put yourself in the shoes of a lot of the time of the audience who are consuming the news, and they are people who are not in your business. They're people who may not understand all these acronyms and will need things explaining to them. And so in a sense, you're the perfect person to kind of play the devil's advocate. Absolutely, you know, you have got to be confident enough to say, you know, I don't understand this. What does this mean? And more often than not, if you're getting back an answer that goes over, you know, a minute and a half, it means that it needs simplifying further. And then I think you can really make progress with who you're working with as to how to best achieve that. Are there any analogies you could use? How would you describe this to your grandmother? I mean, I think we've all probably used that same one, but it really, really is so important that you can say that. And don't be afraid to say that you don't understand something, because if you've got to then communicate that, and you're the person who's on the front line to communicate that, and you don't feel confident about the content that you're communicating, again, that's only really going to come back to kind of to haunt you, as it were. So yeah, confidence and being intellectually curious, I think, was something that we'd mentioned before. There's understanding something, and then there's really wanting to kind of go the extra mile and sort of figure out why something works like that. And I really liked, Elspeth, what you said earlier about, you know, why are all my friends asking me about credit cards? You know, I get a lot of questions about pensions because, yes, we're an investment manager, but ultimately, you know, we provide the investments for ISAs, and we also run people's pensions. And what does a pension mean? And how do I get a pension? And what's auto enrollment? And I think the more and more that you can kind of help people understand how to provide for their future, and you know, take away all the kind of vehicles, but actually, like, what is it that you're trying to get to in the end? Then I think you start making really good inroads, and then you can hopefully work with your internal stakeholders to get them to kind of come out of the trenches and actually see the world the way that other people see it.
Great, and that leads me nicely to my next area of questioning. There are now more channels to consider than ever when communicating your message. The role of communication has broadened over the years, and there's a crossover now between traditional, digital, marketing, all falling under and crossing over the communications channel. Elspeth, how has communications evolved over time, and what does a communications expert role encompass now?
So I think this is something which we were really keen to talk to everyone, because I think it's changed a lot, and it also hasn't changed at all, actually. When you look at it, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I was very lucky that the first agency I went into had a planner. So to Emma's point about advertising, we had a planner in our agency, even though it was a comms agency, and their job was to understand the audiences that our clients needed to target. So to me, the point about channels is you need to work with whichever business it is to understand who they are trying to reach, and therefore apply the appropriate strategies and channels to make it work. And I think so many times in this industry, people get caught with, I want to be in the FT, or I want a press release about this. And actually it's like, yes, that might be the tactical solution, but ultimately we need to understand what a business is trying to achieve, who it's trying to reach and influence, what they think about the business, and therefore push it through. So I think that, you know, what we've seen a lot of over the, you know, the course of my career is a lot of time we started out and you were a traditional media relations person. So public relations clearly in its broadest sense is about so much more, but the shorthand became media relations and get some coverage for us, please. And that can still be very much part of, you know, a communications campaign. But I think that, you know, when we set up Better, we very much set it up to say, the world doesn't look like that anymore. You know, the rise of social, the fact that, you know, anybody can find anything online means that you have to think about all of your channels and your audiences in a very different way. So, you know, even if we get a brief which says we want some media relations, the conversation always goes back to what are you trying to achieve, what are you trying to get your audiences to do, and which are the most appropriate channels. And it's usually a blend between all of them. And sometimes in this role, you can be in charge of all of those channels. Often as not, you're not. And actually that's where some of the fun really starts to happen, which is, okay, well, what's the overall strategy? What's the messaging? And then how do we make it appropriate to earned media versus paid versus shared versus, you know, how do we pull all of that together into plans and activations, which really start to create some compelling business impact campaigns rather than just, you know, coverage for the sake of it. So, you know, I think things have changed a lot, but to me, the fundamentals are still the same, which is thinking about the audience first and work out what needs to happen second.
Absolutely. And it's not just about external communications. There's an internal comms piece there as well to make sure the business is understanding, your internal stakeholders are understanding what you're trying to achieve. Emma, how do you incorporate that internal communications aspect with your external campaigns?
I guess using the same principles that Elspeth has just spoken about. Think about your audience. So what do you want your audience to feel? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to do? And ultimately your internal audiences will still need communicating to in a straightforward, simple, you know, jargon-free as far as possible manner. They're still ultimately they're employees of the firm that you represent, but ultimately they still need to be able to go and describe this to their family or what you're doing, so that, and they need to feel proud about it as well. So it needs to the importance of audience is absolutely critical. I think what does tend to happen, and certainly has happened to this day, is the audience gets a little bit forgotten, and then tactics start getting talked about almost instantly. And so the trick is to keep coming back to what's our objective, who are we trying to communicate to, what are the key messages, yeah, and then ultimately segment them per the different audiences. And they may all carry 2 or 3 of the same things, but you're not going to communicate quite the same way in a, you know, in a tweet as you are, or a LinkedIn post as you are, you know, maybe to the press, for example. So you do need to kind of be able to tailor the content that you're working with. And I think it's really interesting as well. You may not necessarily be controlling all of those different elements, but you certainly need to have a good kind of messaging house. All of the principles of communications apply, but it's incredible how quickly, when you're working with people who aren't comms professionals, how quickly they kind of get a bit torn up, and then it all becomes, as you say, can you write me a press release? And actually the press release isn't necessarily the right thing, and you know, which target media they're in, and then you realize that actually that target media isn't going to reach any of the individuals that they're trying to reach either. So it's a very like collaborative exercise, and certainly you know, your employees are your biggest constituent, and they can ultimately be your kind of ambassadors, if you like, if you get all of the different audiences working in harmony.
Great, thank you. I'd just like to move on a bit to the next area of questioning, and that's around you know, the development and, you know, the advice for audience today. For me, whenever I was looking for my next comms role, I'd pay particular attention to the training and development offered. And I know there's a particular resilience needed for people applying. I know, Emma, you mentioned earlier that, you apply for hundreds of roles before you got your foot in the door, first of all. And, you need that kind of strength within to keep persevering, especially if you're applying for your first roles. And this one just goes out to everyone. Maybe I'll start with Gilly. What advice would you give our audience here today to help them make their first or next move successfully?
I suppose I think the first move versus next move is probably a fairly different thing to think about. I think with the first move, it is, to that point that you just said, be a bit thick-skinned. I mean, I was lucky having 2 years experience to be hired into a role straight away, but I certainly got an awful lot of no's as well as that one yes. So it's don't think that a few no's means that you're never gonna get there. Keep persevering, keep getting experience. I'd say number one tip for someone starting out is just get as much experience as you can. Because I think that also means, and even if it is just 2 weeks here or there, try out different parts of comms. It might be actually that you find you really love, and you never thought you would, financial comms, doing calendar work and M&A stuff, and you might have never thought of that before, unless you have that experience. So I'd say just try and get at an entry level stage when you're doing your work experiences or anything like that, as broad a range of experience as is possible, and reach out to people. Don't be shy. I remember when I did my final year at uni, my dissertation was on financial PR, and I just got the PR Week Power Book and emailed about 100 people asking them if I could interview them for my dissertation. Of course, not everyone came back, but actually some did. And I have, some connections now that I've had for the past however many, 15 years or so, since then. So I'd say don't be shy, put yourself out there, be prepared for some knockbacks. And then I'd say, in terms of someone who's thinking about their next move, really think, try to take a step back. I think it's quite easy to let yourself get carried away with the next title, the next role, and sort of channeling yourself up as quickly as possible. And I think to the points that we just made there around the fact that comms is becoming ever more integrated now, I would just, my one piece of advice, and it's something that I ended up having to try and row back on as I got further on in my career, actually, because of how things evolved as I've grown up, but is actually, I got quite narrow, and I've had to try and broaden myself out. So I'd say, rather than just keep chasing every 6 months that next title, really try to just take a step back when you can and say, where do I want to be in 5 years time, 10 years time? And what skills do I need to get there, rather than being solely focused on that next promotion or title? Because it might be great for that next 6 months, next year, but actually, if you look at your career in the round for the next 10 years, was that the right move? And that's where I think the point on training is really important. And it might be that actually the best move for you, if you're in a good agency with good training, is to talk to your current line manager and say, I want to do this. Is there an opportunity to? Because there may well be. And if you don't ask, you don't know. And a quick PRCA plug is a lot of the agencies that I know of and have worked with do offer PRCA training. Obviously, the PRCA offers excellent training. I've done many of their courses. So when looking for whether it's an agency or an employer, really do look at someone who's going to invest in you. And I think the thing I always say, coming from an agency background, is, our research, our R&D is our people, right, as PR agencies. So if you're not investing in your people, are you investing in your business, quite frankly? So that's another piece of advice I'd just give.
Can I add to that? I was laughing,
yes.
Julie, at your thought, your trying to get up the ladder as quickly as possible, because I've obviously done this for a long time and line managed a lot of people. And I was thinking back to a point I had when I was 32, and I'd been made board director of the agency at the time, and I'd had my first baby, and one of my team was turning around going, well, what do you do now for the rest of your career? Is that it? And me just going, shit, well, no, I've just chased and chased and chased up. And that's amazing. But you've still got another 40 years to work. And actually, I think we're all going to be working for such a long time. I think some of the stuff about roles comes down to some really fundamentals. What do you enjoy doing? What kind of people do you enjoy working with? Can you, within an interview process, establish whether that culture is going to fit and support you? And I think in a virtual environment, those are sometimes hard questions, but they're really important questions, because this isn't an easy job. It's hard work. It's not 9 till 5. It's something where people stay very switched on the whole time. And I think, to me, the cultural piece is as important, if not more so, than functionally what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Because if you've got a team of people around you who will support you and help you grow and want the best for you, and therefore will advocate for you, will train you, will do all of those things, to my mind, that's what you're looking for. And that's how you will really help to build your confidence and excel in your career as well. So I think that stuff's important, which is the soft stuff which you can't really see, but you can feel as you're going through an interview process. And I would just say a lot of that is trust your gut. Think about how you feel when you've been talking to people in an agency. Does this feel right for me? Does something jar? Because if things jar, there's usually a reason. And then get really good feedback, either from the people who are interviewing you, if you're going direct, or from a recruiter. Make sure you ask the questions. If you didn't get it, why? What can they pick you up on? Because often it's really small things, and actually they're things which you can change just by being knowledgeable about them as well.
Absolutely. And I'd just like to emphasize the whole networking point. It has helped me tremendously throughout my career. From right at the beginning, we have LinkedIn now. There is a vast network out there. You can reach out to people directly and get that first-hand feedback on what a company is to work with, and to get that insight before you make that decision to apply for that role or during your interview stages. Additionally, keeping in contact with your colleagues throughout, your career is incredibly important. I've worked in agencies since 2012. And I've only just moved into my first in-house role, but I've seen my in-house colleague, my agency colleagues from my very first jobs, have incredible careers and now work in some of the largest and most interesting, some work in startups, but very interesting companies. And to keep in contact, that will build your network for deciding where you would want to move next, if that's something that would interest you. So, I always go by, it's Heather McGregor, the Taylor Bennett Foundation. She's out of the Taylor Bennett Foundation. I had a session with her when I was looking to enter communications industry, and she told me that your network is your net worth. And I've always gone by that. Keep in contact with people. You've got LinkedIn there. Hand out your business cards to everyone. And it's not just about people you work with. It's about media. Again, like I said, your colleagues, and go to networking events and meet new people. You never know where it might lead you. And
if I could just add to that, Kuldeep, I think that's a really good point. Is especially in agency, while there seems to be this sort of, you see senior people going out and networking, and I think you grow. Being able to grow with your network is really important. So even at the most junior entry level, if you've got a client who is also a junior person in that team, go and take them out for a coffee, the two of you. Don't be shy. And equally, when a new journalist joins a trade publication, be the person who goes out and has that coffee with them, because in 10 years' time, they may well be, a very influential journalist. But even if not, they're still a relevant journalist for you then, who you should be talking to and getting to know. So I would say investing on right from the start. Sorry, Kuldeep.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think if anybody else has anything to add, I think we can move on to our Q&A session.
Okay,
are we good? Monika, I will pass back to you and Kyrie for the Q&A.
I think that this has been super insightful. I was taking notes the whole time, just trying to capture everything because there's so much to remember. So yeah, as Kuldeep said, we would like to open the floor to questions now. So as far as I know, we have a Q&A function that you can ask the question live if you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, feel free to pop the questions into the chat. I'm going to give it a few minutes before people maybe come up with what they want to ask, and I'm going to start with my own question. So I know that Elspeth mentioned at the beginning of our call today that she's currently recruiting people. So I would like to ask what you're looking for when you're hiring. What are you looking for in the CV, in the cover letter? How to stand out when someone's applying for a job?
I think that's a really good question. So some of it comes down to some real basics, right? So to the point on sending out 100 job applications, I know that you have to do that. Try and get the person's name right, who you're emailing, and the name of the company, because actually it's very easy to get those things wrong. I would say on that basis also, like if you see a general job advert for a firm, go and try and work out who might be the boss who's going to be doing the recruiting, and find their name and try and address it to that person, try and look personal with it. A good cover letter, like my view, if you're doing lots of applications, is pick the ones which you think are more likely to be for you and spend the time doing a personalized cover letter explaining who you are, because it makes a difference. It doesn't take much. Go onto the company's website, have a look at a couple of things. I was really impressed by your client list. I thought this case study you did was really relevant because I once did X, something which really helps to show that you've paid a special interest in that firm. And then in terms of the CV, I think it's just being really clear about who you are. And I think I've been really impressed recently. I've had various CVs in from people who've done things like they might have trained in a different field, or they've changed, or they're shifting careers. Just things which explain it. You know, at the end of the day, we're talking about being communicators. So people who are actually clearly communicating about their path and journey so far, and ideally a bit of what you're actually looking for as well, like being brave enough to say, not just I want a job, which might be the answer, and that's also fine, but I'm looking for something which, and I think I can bring this. So I think it is just about trying to tell your story in a way which you're confident in, and really having that. And then use your mates, use your family, get someone else to check it would be my other thing. Like just get people to sense check what you're writing as you're sending that in, because what makes sense to you might not make sense to someone else. So again, use people around you to do that as well.
Oh, those are some really good points, and I'm sure that everyone can like take some knowledge from that. And yeah, we probably always like get caught up in what we do, and it's always good to get a sense check. Yeah. Emma, do you have any tips?
Yeah, I would say treat getting a job as having, treat it as a job in itself. Like actually getting the right job is a really important investment. And if you rush it or you're not diligent, you could end up making mistakes along the way and make the process incredibly long, and you may not get that valuable feedback that you desperately need. And research the company that you're interested in. Make sure that it has the values that you want to be a part of. There is a lot of data out there now on through LinkedIn, company websites. You can go onto companies that rank really well for various different things, and work out where you think you would best fit and make a difference. And then obviously in this kind of current climate, I guess there are just going to be ultimately you are going to be hitting against a bit of a closed door more often, in the way that I was with my advertising career. And you've got to have some resilience, and it is difficult. And I do kind of sympathize with anyone looking for a role right now. It must be very challenging, but it's very important to keep focused and treat getting a job like having a job, and be very, very, very focused on it.
Yeah, I think I'd just add, because I saw the question on the chat which sort of placed this as well on getting hired in the current environment. I mean, I'm actually a case in point of someone who has changed jobs in lockdown. I started a new job 2 weeks ago, and it came actually from, well, initially I started talking to the company I now work for, PowerSquat, a couple of years ago, and kept in touch with them. I didn't move over a couple of years ago, but and it comes back to that networking point. When you meet people, keep those contacts, semi-warm, and you never know when the opportunity might be right. I I think the other thing I would say to that is use recruiters. I mean, there are jobs out there I've seen, and I'm not sure if there's loads at the entry level, but Powerscourt, where I work, we have just hired 4 new analysts into which is our graduate program in the past month. So there are jobs out there. It's just a case of sort of finding them out. So if you're finding it hard to kind of navigate what the jobs are in the areas that you're keen to do, just, recruiters' jobs are to get you jobs. So that's what they get paid for. And they've also got amazing insights into things like the culture at different agencies and different companies, depending on their areas of expertise. So what I actually find really helpful is, I've got sort of 2 or 3 recruiters who I meet for a coffee probably every 6 months or so, just to get a feel for what's going on out there, and what's the competition like, what are other agencies doing, and where are they hiring at the moment? Because at my level, I'm interested to see where they're developing. But if you're constantly there, then you start hearing interesting things and going, gosh, that agency's doing some interesting stuff, or that culture feels quite me. So I'd say, reach out to those guys as well. Don't be shy to, not just reach out directly to people who you want to be employed by, but use other means and ways to find out who is hiring, which actually you might find that then names crop up that you'd never even thought of, that you then go to explore and think, wow, how did I not know about this company? They look brilliant.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in terms of where jobs are, obviously LinkedIn is a great function for helping us with that. It's also a nightmare because you have all the jobs on there, and you can end up sending things into the ether and never hear from them again. So I think I've seen people who are very smart, who've sort of recognised you apply via a LinkedIn channel, but you also work out what's the direct email route in as well. So you try and get both of the jobs for the jobs that you're interested in. And then I think to the point where, Julie was talking about things like digging through like the power list in PR Week, there are lots of different directories which give you fast growth firms, award-winning firms, firms which are doing interesting things, firms which have hired new people at the moment. And you can also see the ones which aren't hiring, and I'm talking more agency side now. But if you actually just go out there and do some of that reading and you'll start to see the same names coming up, and those are usually the firms which are more likely to be sort of expanding and putting roles in. And a lot of them will have an email address which is just careers@, which if you send it in, you might not get the job straight away. There might not be a job straight away, but you'll often get someone to say, this is great, I'll put you on file. Like I'm doing this at the moment for our graduate placements for next year. I'm like, this is great, you're too early, put it on file. If you don't hear back from us Feb time, come back to us. So sort of have slight faith in the system and sort of go as many routes in as possible to be able to do it, I'd say.
Sounds great, absolutely great. We have another question that came through the Q&A. The person is commenting on great insights, which I can absolutely agree with. Coming back to the self-development and training, do you have any course/training session recommendations for someone junior? And this person adds that they personally enjoy the CFA's Investment Foundation certificate, which I've never heard about, but you guys, I'm sure, are very familiar with. Apart from reading the FT and Trade Press, do you have any tips on getting the industry knowledge?
I'll dive in first, and I'm sure Emma's probably got some insights as well on the training that BlackRock do. But I mean, yeah, the CFA's definitely that's a serious piece of training that you're doing. So well done. I mean, there are others, but I'd say at the junior level, and it comes back to that point on talking. I'd say talk to your line manager about what are your areas for development, because actually it might be that your investment knowledge is tip top, but your communication skills might need some honing. So I'd say at a junior level, don't ever forget that at the end of the day, you're a comms person. And yes, that sector knowledge is really great. And, once you've done the CFA Foundation, you can go on to do things like the IMC certificate. There are plenty of things in that area. The CISI as well has quite a lot of, I personally had to do financial regulation training for the CISI, which was pretty dull, but important, and I had to do it. So I did that at a very junior level. So there's those sorts of things, but yeah, don't forget that at the end of the day, it's a comms role. So when you're talking to your manager about, areas of development and training, actually, I'd say at the junior level, don't forget to concentrate on that. You know, what are your writing skills like, your presentation skills, and really get the basics right first. I don't know, Emma, Elspeth, if you had anything to add on that.
Yeah, I would agree, Gilly. I think that there are obviously all sorts of different you know, trainings that you can do in development in respect of investments. I think as a comms professional, you know, ultimately they're really important, but I would also make sure that you're up to date on kind of, you know, your writing skills, and don't be afraid to kind of refresh them. You may be recently out of university and constantly typing and feeling like writing is absolutely something that you've been doing for many, many years now, but there is a skill to actually doing that as a professional. So I would say, you know, do explore. There are a lot of resources available that are actually free in terms of communication, writing skills, how to communicate to different audiences, as we were talking about earlier. There are a number of kind of platforms now that are kind of leading the way in terms of internal communications, and how to kind of bring some of the platforms that we all know and love in terms of that snackable, digestible content, and bringing that to internal audiences, so that, you know, ultimately content gets read. People are still time poor, whether they're, you know, in a big organization or they're reading, you know, how do you make your content as exciting as, you know, social media? And ultimately, I think those are the things that I think are just as important as becoming a subject matter expert on a particular form of investment. And to some extent, you know, because investments is so broad, you know, you can cover everything from real estate, hedge funds, everything through to equities, bonds, multi-asset, you know, the list goes on and on and on. So the likelihood of you becoming deep in all of those areas is, I'm not quite sure that that should necessarily be your aim, but over time you would want to have a very good understanding of each of those areas. Certainly don't forget the kind of the core communication skills, because that's ultimately, when you're going for a communications role, that's what your recruiter or your the person that you're going for the role will be looking for. Yeah. And Monica, I'm sure we can send some links after this webcast to you know, to my point around, you know, what would be helpful.
That would be amazing, and I'm sure that everyone in the audience would really appreciate that. So thank you, Emma.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that the wonders of the world as it's changed, but also this year in particular, there's been so much developed which is self-serve, where you can go online and develop a skills, watch a YouTube video on various things. LinkedIn, which is one of my clients, does a lot of education pieces where you can really understand how to use it. So I think working through some of that. And then the other thing I was going to say is a really basic piece, which is if you're in role and you're in a junior role, even if you're not doing things like staffing a journalist meeting or on a meeting, ask if you can join them as a silent participant and listen. I have to say, I realised really later in my career than I probably should have done that I'm far more of an oral learner than I am actually by reading. So, you know, often you'll find in investments and financial services, you start reading, you're suddenly 18 pages in something incredibly detailed and trying to work out what it was you were meant to do in the first place. Whereas if you listen to an engaging spokesperson explain their strategy and explain, you know, what they think about what's happening in the markets, and then whichever version of it is, you learn so quickly that way. So I would also say there's a bit which is put your hand up and say, can I join that? Can I just listen in? And I'll make the time up afterwards if that needs to be a thing, but you actually have part of it available to you in your working day. But it comes back to that intellectual curiosity point at the beginning we talked about, is like apply it and show it, because actually that's where a lot of the knowledge draw comes from as well.
Amazing. Again, some great insights. I'm just like, I'm not even doing financial services, but
you will see, Monica, don't worry, we'll convince you.
All right, I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let's see. But I actually wanted to come back to the topic that actually we have here people who have experience working in an agency, but also people who work in-house. So I was wondering if we could, obviously it's a very broad topic, differences between agency and in-house, but I was wondering if we could just compare the biggest differences.
I'm happy to go first. So obviously, I've spent my career working in-house, so I can tell you what it's like working in-house. I can tell you probably the perception of working in-house, and I've spent my career working with agency partners, and that's how I was fortunate enough to work with Gilly when she was at FTI Consulting. So essentially, you have kind of one corporate brand, potentially, as some companies obviously have multiple brands, but for argument's sake, one brand. So I think the perception is that you've got one client, which on the face of it is true at the top line. But within that company, you may well have multiple different businesses. And so you've kind of got to put on different hats per different business line that you are working with. And all of them may have slightly different audiences. So in that sense, there is actually some commonality between in-house and an agency role. I think the other part that I would just mention that which I think is really important is you can have a really excellent working relationship with in-house and agency, which I think is sort of like 1 + 1 = 3. Like I do think that that kind of an agency being plugged into multiple clients, different sectors, that can just bring so much to your internal kind of stakeholders, and can really enrich the communication strategy that you are looking to deploy. Having you know, it's like bringing the outside world in. That's how a good agency and in-house partnership can work. But certainly you can obviously become much deeper into the business than you can if you are working in an agency. And that's not for everyone. Some people obviously want to work across lots of different accounts, lots of different businesses where you get probably more variety. In-house, you know, you have got two sets of stakeholders. You've got your internal stakeholders and you've got the media, or whatever your public stakeholder is, and a lot of your job is kind of balancing the two. So you live in you know, in a world that's not always quite as straightforward as you like, and that's again not for everyone. But personally, I've found it very rewarding over the years, and hence why I think I've stayed in-house for so long. And there was a time, probably about 10 years ago, where I did think if I was going to move to an agency, I probably should do it now. But then, you know, the company I work for kind of has always ended up doing really interesting things, and kind of before I knew it, I'd done another 10 years. So I guess the ship sailed on that one. But certainly I think I did just want to point out that there can be a really excellent partnership between in-house and agency, and I'm fortunate enough to have had that throughout my career.
Yeah, I can briefly cover agency. I'm sure Elspeth will chip in as well. I think, you know, and it's the thing to Emma's point that I've enjoyed. As I say, I did a year in house at a very junior level, so my experience is, you know, quite dated and possibly, you know, a little bit not quite as involved as Emma's. But I'd say from the agency side, it's the variety that really is what's kept me there. And, you know, even within investments and financial services, there is an awful lot of variety. You know, I myself am an investments expert within financial services, but within that, I work with asset managers, I work with investment platforms, I work with investment banks, and you sort of seeing it from all angles, I think, is the thing that I love from an agency side. Is, you know, when you get to work with those different clients and you connect the dots a lot more with how it all works and connects together as a financial system, which is really interesting. And I guess, yeah, personally, I think Emma's probably got it a bit tougher in some ways, because in an agency you are surrounded by comms people who understand what you do, which I always think is great. And I think from a junior level, perhaps you learn a lot more in the current environment. It's tricky because we're all working remotely a lot more, but from absorbing around you, if you don't have a big in-house team, Emma's team is probably bigger than a lot of others. If it's just you and one other working in an agency, just at a junior level, sitting and absorbing, I think is a great way to learn. And one of the first pieces of advice I got given was, be a sponge, absorb everything around you. And I continue to do that now as much as is possible. So I'd say, that's flying the flag for agency. That's why I think it's but Elspeth, I'm sure you've got plenty of insights.
Yeah, I mean, I would say variety. I think the other thing I would add from the agency side, and probably the bit that has kept me going alongside the variety of all of the many clients I've worked in anything and everything across financial services, is you're also sitting in the business of communications and building businesses around communications. So, I've been involved over the last 3 years and through my career in building teams, in going out and pitching to people like Emma, other heads of comms, heads of marketing, try and win their business, convince them that we know what we're doing, then establishing and building that out, and then trying to build a reputation with your team for doing better work and winning awards around that, and then learning how to market your business and take it out as well. So I think that the other thing I would add on the agency side, which again, it will either be for you or be like, no, I just want to, I want to specialize through, is you have the ability to broaden into sort of the commercial side of communications as well, which for some people is really interesting, and certainly for me, it's clearly something I love. So
amazing. And the final question that I would like us to tackle before we wrap it up for tonight. So let's imagine that someone has just graduated from university and they would like to get into PR, and they're not really sure what sector would be great for them. But since we've been talking about the financial sector communications today, what would be your argument for someone to convince them to choose financial communications? Well, this whole field. What would be your argument for someone to join this field?
I'll jump in first. I think I've already said it, which is the thing I love about financial services. And I never thought I'd say this, to our point. I didn't age 17 going into PR think I'd fall into financial services PR and love it, but I do. Is the fact that it really does touch absolutely everything. If we're talking about investing in the markets, to my point, you can be talking about, have a client who's talking about Tesco's results one day, have a client who's talking about, ESG and governance issues in China. It's just so broad and it touches everything. So actually for someone starting out, you might think, oh, financial services is stuffy, but actually it gives you a really good overall view of quite a lot of different sectors and areas. It touches politics, economics, consumer, corporate, everything. So that's my 2 cents worth.
I would just kind of echo what Gilly has said. I think that finance is at the heart of so many different parts of the way that the world operates, the economy, clearly politics, and increasingly in the way that people think about society. And I think there's always been a part of me that's been very interested in helping, or at least I'd love to think that in the future there would be much more financial inclusion in everybody's lives from a really young age. And it's astonishing how it's this thing over there that people do for a job versus actually finance generally should be part of all of our lives in the way that we, think about our mortgage or pay our rent and I think for me, when I strip away kind of, the investments and the way that, companies, like my company invests in companies, et cetera, but ultimately it's all about ensuring people are financially resilient in life and that they understand how to save and then ultimately invest. And so if you're interested in those things, then I think a career in finance can be really, really rewarding.
I mean, I would just echo what they just said. I don't think what I could say any better what Emma just said, actually, in terms of, I think you spend a long time when you've been working in finance comms trying to work out the soul searching bit. And it's the, why am I doing this? What am I really doing here? And it comes back to that, exactly what they're both saying, which is money makes the world go round. And ultimately, a better world is one where money is more evenly distributed and more people understand about it. And if we can do that, that's not just about consumer PR, that runs all the way through everything that we do. So, I absolutely believe that. And I think that it's an amazing career for people who are looking for sort of something which is crunchy and which they want to get their head around, but also apply a creativity to it as well. And I think that's the other thing, which is really getting those two pieces together: intellectual curiosity, creativity, and finding a different way to help people engage with a subject matter they might not know about. That's definitely the stuff which, gets me excited anyway.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. Kuldeep, do you have any closing remarks?
I would just like to thank the panelists today. Incredibly insightful conversation. I've learned an incredible amount today as well. Maybe I might, hit up LinkedIn and see what's out there. But no, yeah, I just want to just go back to the point that I really do think networking is incredibly important. I've worked with Chile at FTI, Elspeth, and through arranging this event, now have met Emma, who works for BlackRock. So an amazing connection. And believe you me, I'm going to be keeping in contact with Emma. And when we can arrange our first coffee or pint, I'm going to be hitting you up, Emma. So look, just keep out there. So guys, look, I just want to say, look, just keep at it. We are in incredibly difficult times with economic and business disruption like we've never seen before. But as we saw with the GFC and Elspeth navigating her career around that, and then the tech bubble with Emma, there are opportunities out there. So persevere, be resilient, and just keep going. Message people. You have LinkedIn, don't be shy. Just get out there, and I have every confidence that you will have successful careers. And thank you once again to our amazing panelists here today, and to Monika for co-hosting.